Hello, yes, thank you, Catherine. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Down here, I've just seen in the comments quite a lot of people in the sun, thankfully, but a lot of people in cold and windy Scotland or wherever. If it is sunny where you are, then why the hell aren't you outside enjoying the first day of freedom, so to say, enjoying a drink on a park bench? But thank you very much for joining me for this kind of deeper dive into Greek wines. So hopefully a number of you watched my kind of introduction to Greek wine back in, I think it was June. God, who'd have thought we'd still be in the same situation? But today I really wanted to look a little bit closer, not just at some specific regions, but also at some specific wines. So hopefully you will have noticed that our Greek range has expanded over the last few months. It's going to get bigger, which is great. We've got an amazing offer coming in the end of May where we're going to be featuring a load of different wines, and I'm going to mention a few bits that will be highlighting in that offer during this tasting. But I wanted to showcase a few of the new wines that we've got in, whilst also kind of reflecting back to some of the wines we've had in for a little while. So hopefully, as Catherine said, you've got some of the wines. You don't have to have all of them. That would be a pretty epic Monday evening if you did have all of them. But it would be really great if you let us know in the chat what you're tasting, what you think, and hopefully some of you have got kind of little pairings that you can compare with. But I'll do my best to kind of taste through and tell you what I think they taste like, and then everyone in the chat can go along. Right, enough jibber jabber. Let's share my screen. I'm sure those that have watched the presentation before will recognize a few of these slides. I'm going to try and make this as different as possible, but there might be some slight repetition. I'm trying to get the presentation-y bit up there with me just a second. Right. Can everybody see that? Hopefully, yes. I'm just going to continue. If there's any issues, then somebody shout. So the hope is to look at Crete, Santorini, and then Naoussa. We're going to do it in that order. So we're going to start with the Nomas Assyrtiko and the Irrigation Mandalari. But first, let's just go to Google Maps, because everybody knows that I love Google Maps when it comes to wine. And just to remind everybody where Greece is, and most importantly, actually, where Crete is in comparison. So Crete is actually Europe's most southerly winemaking region, believe it or not. It's further south than Jerez. It's further south than Cyprus, just. It's further south than Sicily. And so it really does kind of push the limits for viticulture. And what helps make it possible is this massive mountain range that divides the country in two, moving from west to east. It's a mountain range that stretches right down from the northwest of Greece and goes down through the Mediterranean, as you can probably see there. And then it runs through Crete, and it divides it up very much into two main sections. You've got the very hot south, where you get the hot winds coming up from North Africa, and then you get the slightly cooler, slightly wetter northern side of the mountains. And actually, although it's the most southerly island of the Greek islands, it's on average about 1 degree Celsius cooler than somewhere like Santorini that we'll see in just a minute. So if you keep that in mind, and we'll just zoom in a little bit with this next picture, this will give you a better idea as to what Crete looks like. So it is Greece's largest island. It is the most southerly, as I've already mentioned. And again, it's dominated by mountain ranges. Believe it or not, there are actually 30 mountain ranges going from west to east of Crete, all over 2,000 meters high. Bearing in mind that Ben Nevis, I think, is like 1,300 meters, it gives you an idea of just how mountainous Crete is. Greece as a whole is Europe's third most mountainous country. And, when it comes to islands in the Mediterranean, there are not many that are particularly mountainous. And so this does make Crete really rather exceptional. And it is why that you can get some pretty amazing viticulture at quite a southerly area. It's split pretty much into 4 kind of districts. My Greek pronunciation is pretty awful, but going from west to east, there's Hania. It's spelled Chania, but I believe it's pronounced Hania. There's Rethymno, there's Heraklion, and then there's Lasithi to the far east. And the wines that we're going to be tasting from Crete today, the first one is from the west, so it's from Hania, and the next is from kind of Heraklion area, Heraklio, so just south of the main city in Crete, kind of in the middle where you can see my cursor there. Although it is split in 2, there is a slight difference in weather patterns on the northern side. So the northeast is relatively warm and relatively dry, and the northwest is a little bit cooler and a little bit more humid. So you tend to get some more of the white wines like we'll be tasting today on the northwest, and then some of the warmer, hotter, richer red wines to the east. Right. This just, sums it up. In terms of the soils on Crete, very, very important. So we're looking at predominantly clay and limestone. So it's basically Burgundy, isn't it? Clay is great because, sorry, Catherine, is there anything?
Sorry, you're going in and out a little bit on sound. I think
you
move back a little bit. You're a little bit far from the microphone. Are you able to be a little nearer?
Is that better? Oh, what I can do, I can turn up my microphone, I think.
That might work.
Is that any better?
Yeah, and and just stay still, but carry on. It's great.
Sorry. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, everybody. If you feel I missed anything important, then shout. I was just talking about soils very quickly. So predominantly clay and limestone. Clay's great for warmer areas. It takes a little bit longer to warm up. It retains water very nicely, and so you do get a good water retentive capacity, and so it stops vines going into hydric stress and struggling for moisture. And then limestone is great for lovely fresh white wines, holding acidity, good drainage, yada yada yada. So although rainfall on Crete in general is relatively low, there's lots of water available from the snow melting on the mountains. And so in general, although being very far south, there's good water availability. Now, Crete, for me, is probably the most exciting region in Greece. It's home to a number of indigenous varieties, which all have wonderful character and are really coming to the fore, and certainly have been over the last few years. It's been dominated for white wines by a grape variety called Villana over the last kind of 20, 30 years, which, to be honest, is quite a neutral grape variety. It doesn't give the world's most exciting white wines, in my opinion, and is often used as a blending component on Crete. The great news is that Vidiano is really being seen as the belle of the ball at the moment, and so more and more plantings of Vidiano are going to the fore. More single varietal expressions of Vidiano are coming about, and certainly when you go over the 10, 12, 15 pound mark, you do start getting some really expressive styles of Vidiano. In terms of general styles, it's not too dissimilar to Chardonnay, I suppose. It's relatively low in acidity, as you find with most whites in Crete, just because of the warmth. And it gives this lovely, broad, stone fruity style of white wine. It's got a good affinity for oak, and so you do often see lightly oaked examples, but more often than not at the 10, 12 pound price bracket, they're typically aged and matured and fermented in stainless steel. Sometimes spent some time in the lees. And interestingly enough, quite often, well, I say quite often, sometimes aged in amphora as well. So we've got an offer coming out, actually not the Greek offer, but there's a separate offer where we've got a Vidiano that's part aged and fermented in amphora, which will be coming out a little bit later this year, which is really exciting. It's delicious. In terms of the red grape varieties, there are three main ones that dominate in Crete. So we've got Kotsafali, Mandallaria, which we're just about to taste. It's also known as Mandallari, and Liatico. So I brought in a Liatico a couple of months ago, which is from Hatsudakis, who make the Assyrtiko, and it just gives lovely, juicy, soft red wines with super sweet tannins, lovely, refreshing acidity. Kotsafali's slightly different. Again, it's mainly used as a blending component, often with Mandallari. Mandallari is the darkest coloured of the Greek red grape varieties, and so it typically gives very rich, brooding, ferociously tannic red wines. And so Kotsafali is often used just to round it out, soften out the mid palate, and give a slightly more complete wine. In terms of the PDOs on Crete, I don't want to really go into them, just because, in my opinion, the PDOs don't really make much sense on Crete. There are 7 in total, 5 of them are in Heraklio, but most of the time they're using Villana or other grape varieties that are not, for me, as exciting. And so the wines that we're tasting today are PGI wines, they're not PDOs. And I think, for PDOs on Crete, just forget about it. Just taste what you can and find your own way about it. Right, let's move on to, you'll recognize this slide from the last one. I just wanted to give a very quick update on Assyrtiko as a grape variety before we taste the first one. It's possible that some of you have got both Assyrtikos, which is an amazing comparison. If you do, shout in the chat and let me know your thoughts between the two, because they are wildly different but share common characteristics. So very briefly, as the name suggests, Assyrtiko is an assertive grape variety. It's high in alcohol, high in acidity, very full-bodied, very textured, and gives quite mineral. Sorry, Catherine, are we
No, it's fine. We think the sound is going in and out again a little bit. We think it might be because you're sharing the slides. So we're going to get Anna to share the slides behind, and we'll crack on.
If you're doing that, I could go on my other computer if you like, and that might work.
Yeah, if we have to do that, that's fine. Or we can.
Sorry, everyone.
We can get Anna to have the slides up, and then we can crack on, because your sound is perfect once you're not doing anything with the slides.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. I think it's just the internet is having a little bit of a moment.
I might just need a second to.
That's absolutely fine. Do let us know in the chat what you're thinking of the wines that you've got with you this evening.
I might just have to log out of this one and come back on the other one very quickly.
That's not a problem. You can log out and come back on. We'll wait for you. Yeah. We'll be here. So we've got the Nomas Assyrtiko just on the screen at the moment. I've actually got the 2019 this evening, and trying that is perfect for this weather. It's got that really lovely lemony, a slight bit of mineral as well. So if you have this as well, I'd love to hear what you think. I think we're getting Matthew back now.
Can people hear me?
Yeah,
I can hear Matthew.
Is that clear?
That's very clear. Perfect.
Okay, give me 2 seconds. I just need to do something else very quickly. God, this is weird, isn't it? Sorry, everybody. So the Nomas Assyrtiko, whilst I'm doing this other thing I need to do very quickly, I'll talk about the Nomas. So as mentioned, this is from the Hatsudakis winery, who are based in the kind of far west of Crete. And it's made using Assyrtiko, 100% Assyrtiko, which is normally found, of course, on Santorini, but this wine is called Nomas, related to nomad, and kind of showing the exploration of this grape variety and its movements across Greece and becoming a really important grape variety, not just for Santorini, but for the rest of Greece as well. In terms of total plantings of Assyrtiko on Crete, I think there's around 30 hectares, and so it's not insignificant, but it's by no means the most popular white variety there. Right, I was just getting up the wine information on here. So yes, it was the Karafatakis winery was founded by a chap called Manolas Karafatakis, who was head winemaker at a number of kind of co-ops on Crete, but now it's his son Nikos who's really leading the way for this particular winery, and he's doing a wonderful job. Before he took over, it was a lot of the international grape varieties like Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Syrah, which were dominating, but he's stuck to indigenous varieties and is producing, I think, some really exciting, very accessible white and red wines. So in terms of the winemaking for the Nomas, there's no oak whatsoever. Assyrtiko does work well with oak, and it can do, but more often than not, there's no oak. So it'll be fermented in stainless steel at relatively cool temperatures, kind of 14 to 16 degrees, and then aged on the lees for a period of time, just to give that kind of textural, bready, yeasty, slightly savory flavors to Assyrtiko. This is aged on the lees for about 3 months, so not very long. And I'll tell when we get to the Scitali, there's quite a big difference in yeast aging. But what you're left with is this lovely, zesty, crisp, super refreshing style of white wine of Assyrtiko. Typically, they are quite high in alcohol, so I think these are around 14%. I've got the 2019 and the 2020 in my glass. The 19 is really classic Assyrtiko. It's got super piercing acidity, this lovely minerality. I know people don't like the term minerality a lot of the time, but I think it explains these wines perfectly. There's this kind of flinty, it's almost kind of like a grippy on your teeth, and super kind of enlivening, really refreshing style. So for the 19, it's really precise, really elegant. The 2020 is possibly a little bit riper. It's a little bit more floral. It's a little bit more peachy. But again, it's got that wonderful cut of acidity and this lovely weight to it, which is great. So if you've got it, let me know what you think. It's been really popular since I brought it in, and I'm hoping the 2020 is equally popular. Yeah, minerality is a good word. I like it. People get very uppity about it, saying, "Oh, you can't taste minerals," but I don't know. I don't know how else to describe it, really, to be honest. Anyway, let's move on to the red wines. So, when I took over buying for Greece about a year ago, I'd heard a lot about Irrigation winery. It's not a winery that we'd ever bought from in the past, and I knew I wanted to try the wines. I'd never tried them. They're a great kind of tier system with their wines, going from kind of generic kind of estate wines to kind of mid-level, and then what they call single area wines. And so I basically got them to send me everything. It was a really fun tasting, and for me, the single area wines absolutely stood out. So these are still PGI wines, so not PDOs, but single grape varieties from a single plot on the island of Crete. And this one really stood out for me. It's the Mandalari from the Plakura vineyard, which is seen really as a Premier Cru wine from Crete, well, Premier Cru vineyard from Crete. It's about 500 meters altitude, so pretty high up. And Mandalari, as I mentioned, gives some of the darkest colored Greek reds, to the point where often it's blended with a white wine, only about 20%, and they can still make a red wine out of it because it's so deep in color. And this stood out for me because I feel that Greece should be likened a lot to Italy. You know, it's a big country. It's got loads of indigenous grape varieties. It's similar in terms of its latitude and temperature, and there's just this huge plethora of exciting vineyards and aspects and soils. And there is just this ultimately Mediterranean feel to their red wines, which Italy has in spades. And this really reminded me of kind of southern Italian, Calabrian red wines with this lovely, bright, tart acidity, these really firm but ripe at the same time tannins, this lovely oak, a little bit of volatility possibly as well. And it's just really interesting wines with a sense of place. Yeah, someone just said Sicily. I agree. There's this liveliness to the wines which I think is really exciting. And yeah, so what's interesting about this is that 11% of the grapes are dried in the sun before fermentation. So that gives a little bit more concentration, a little bit more complexity. And then it's aged in a combination of French and American oak, roughly 50-50, of which some is new. Let me just try and find out how much. It doesn't say how much. The majority is reused, and it spends 12 months in oak. So this is from 2017, which is an amazing vintage for Greece. And I just think it's wonderful. I think it's super exciting, really expressive.
Well, just let you swallow that, Matthew, but we have had a couple of questions, if we could do those now. The first one is quite relevant to what you've just been speaking about, is the volatility. And Susan has asked whether you could just sort of clarify what you mean by that. I think it's one of those terms, again, like minerality, that comes up quite often when we're talking about wine, but what does it actually mean? And in this instance as well, what does it mean?
So VA, or volatile acidity, is often seen as a wine fault, but can really enhance wines. So it's typically found in warmer climates, certainly areas with warmer cellars, and it gives this super high-toned acidity. It's you don't want to say vinegary, but it's almost on the way to like a vinegar, balsamic notes, and acidity. Yeah, it's classic in a lot of Italian wines. You know, Madeira would probably be the ultimate example, like packed full of volatile acidity, but to an extent where it's not seen as a fault. It's really seen as something that enhances the wines. And I feel this does have that volatile acidity, but in a well kind of a well measured amount.
Integrated, perfect. That layers quite nicely into one of the questions we've also had from Samantha Redmond, who's asking, what would you eat with it? And obviously, in terms of food and wine matching, acidity is quite a big thing for that. It's one of the food friendly aspects of wine. So, anything that you would go with on that, Matthew? I think mine would ultimately be halloumi, or something with a lot of nice fatty richness.
You need that. Yeah, proteins react with. Tannins react with fatty proteins, and so you'd need something with a bit of fat. Halloumi, definitely. If you're going meat free, I'd be saying this with your Easter lamb would be perfect. Like a fatty cut of lamb, leg of lamb, lamb shoulder, that sort of thing would be perfect. And I mean, this is 2017, but it's still youthful. We've still got a few years left on its drinking window, and the tannins are very apparent at the moment, but it will soften very nicely. But if you were to pair this with some food right now, it would soften those tannins and bind them up, and it'll be a pretty good balance, I think.
Perfect. And we've had a question that is related to Crete, but also Greece as a whole. But just in terms of Crete, as that's what we're on at the moment, Justin Douglas has asked, how well is organic viticulture being embraced in Crete? Is that something that is being embraced, or is there some resistance to it?
Yeah, definitely. So I believe Karapatakis and Irrigation are both organic certified. They certainly use organic practices. It's a little bit harder than somewhere like Santorini, where being organic is quite easy because there's very little disease pressure there. But it's certainly something which is being taken up more and more. Um, and so, yeah, these I believe are both, if not organic certified, then definitely following organic practices. But I think the jury's out on organic viticulture, in my opinion. So, but it's yeah, I won't go into that.
Lovely. I'll let you crack on.
Oh God, yeah, I've still got 4 other wines to talk about. Right, let's leave Crete. Let me move my glasses. I've got an amazing assortment of glasses here. I need to move them out of the way. Right. I think we're moving to Santorini now, aren't we? Cool. Google Maps, of course. So, just for reference, that's where Santorini is. It's just a little bit north of Crete, so off the mainland, and it's kind of this kind of backwards sea, I suppose. If you want to know more about the history of Santorini, then I cover a lot of that in my previous video. But Santorini, as we all know, it's prime holiday destination. It's somewhere that benefits from hardly any rainfall. It's sunny almost all the time. There's hardly ever any cloud cover. I think from May to September, the average temperature is 27 degrees. And it's stunning, obviously, of course. Unfortunately, I've not had a chance to go yet, but as soon as we can travel, it will probably be the first place I'll try and go. So it does look incredible. But the holiday business has been detrimental to Santorini as well. The area under vine is decreasing rapidly. So back at the start of the 20th century, there was about 4,500 hectares under vine. And nowadays it's more like 1,200 because hotels and hospitality businesses are buying up land and building hotels, which is a huge shame because, as you could probably tell from this picture, which I'll go on to in just a second, it's hard work making wine in Santorini. Seriously, seriously hard work. The main problem is wind. And so it's a great place if you're a keen sailor and you like being battered around on a boat in the wind. But if you're a bunch of grapes, it's a real nightmare. And they thankfully found of different ways to resist this. And so one of the main reasons is, well, one of the main ways is, as you see in the picture here, it's what's called a coulura, which is a way of training your vines to protect it against the wind. And the other main issue with Santorini viticulture is that, as I mentioned, there's hardly any rainfall. Rainfall is about 5 to 6 inches all year. We probably get that in England on a wet weekend, and so these coulura not only protect the vines and the buds from wind, but also they help trap moisture in these kind of baskets as well. And so Santorini does get a lot of morning mists and fog, and so it traps the moisture in these coulura, which help get vines through the ripening period. Yields on Santorini are famously low. So the Santorini PDO has the lowest allocated yield of all the Greek PDOs. I think it's 60 hectolitres per hectare, but in reality, nobody gets anywhere near that. It's more like 30 at most. And I think for the last few years, winds have been so high and water so scarce that people have been dealing with kind of 5 to 7 hectolitres per hectare, which is absolutely insane considering Grand Cru Burgundy's 30 hectolitres per hectare, I believe. So tiny yields. And so you see from that picture there, that's the coulura, and so they kind of wrap the cane around and then intertwine the spurs with the fruit inside the basket to protect it from the wind. It does mean that any buds flowers on the outside just get completely obliterated by the wind, which is a horrible kind of green harvesting, I suppose, in a way of already a way of restricting your yield straight away. So they do their best to pack them into these baskets, these coluras, and the soil, of course, is volcanic. It's kind of a mixture of basalt and black lava and a little bit of limestone, but it's pretty brutal stuff. It takes a pretty hardy winemaker to keep going here. So this, I believe, the picture here is, I don't think this is Calura. I think this is what's called a Cladeftico, which is a similar idea. But it's just a slightly different way of training them. As you can see, it probably doesn't give them quite the same amount of protection. You can see a little bit of sunburn on some of those grapes, and some of the leaves have been pretty smashed by the hot weather there. But they'll do some hand picking in the winery to remove some of the bruised fruit. But this one's seen as good for Assyrtiko. It's lifted slightly higher off the ground to reduce any minimal disease pressure that there is, and I believe that this also increases yield because you're using more spurs and more fruiting zones as well, and it's not all just packed inside the basket, so to say. A question there about irrigation. Yeah, hardly any irrigation. Well, basically no irrigation on Santorini, just because there isn't any water really. Water basically has to be brought in from the mainland, and what water there is goes to people rather than vines, and so they manage to make do with the moisture and what little rain they do get. So this is the Hatsudakis family. So Haridimos Hatsudakis was one of the pioneers of Santorini. He was actually born in and grew up in Crete, and then moved to Santorini, where he was one of the winemakers at the Butari group, who are a very big wine business on Santorini. But then decided to start making his own wines, and so bought his own little vineyard, and really was a major pioneer for Santorini. And so he was the first person to be certified organic on Santorini, and he was keen to pick late, no sulfur, no fining or filtration, very minimal intervention winemaking. And he really was one of the greats of Greek viticulture. And unfortunately, in 2017, he was unfortunately quite a troubled man, and unfortunately in 2017 he took his own life. And so the Mavra Tragano that we've got today is the last wine he made, and the Scutali from 2017 was the last harvest he did. Unfortunately, he died during harvest in 2017, and so he left behind his wife and 3 children. And I believe, this may not be true, but I believe that the children hadn't necessarily intended on taking over the winery, but in honor of their father, did. And Scutali means the passing on of the baton, and you'll see from the picture, from the label, it's got that baton, and this is kind of their way of taking over from Haridimos and continuing his amazing work. And I think that their Scutali Assyrtiko is one of Greece's, if not the world's, great wines. And if you're lucky enough to grab yourself a bottle before it's sold out, sorry, hopefully you've got it here today and are having a glass, because it is truly stunning. If I've got some of my glass here, this is 2017. You can probably see from the color, it's a very deep golden color, and this is classic Santorini. So to kind of compare it, I know it's older, but compare it in color to the Assyrtiko from Crete. This is pretty hardcore, and so tiny yields as mentioned, cool fermentation, 12-14 degrees to kind of keep those aromas and that nice kind of fresh, vibrant character. And then this spends 12 months on the yeast lees in stainless steel, rather than 3 months from the Karavatakis. And again, that increases that richness, that boldness, that intensity. And it smells incredible. If you've got a glass, it's truly wonderful. It's got this lovely pineapple-y, apricot-y, but also smoky and slightly saline, salty style to it as well. It reminds me, I suppose, as either very old Chenin Blanc, like a Savagnier, or possibly a little bit of old ferment as well, dry ferment. And on the palate, it's just big and rich and very viscous. And I just think it's stunning, and it's a real treat. So yeah, unfortunately this is sold out. We are bringing out another Hatsudakis Assyrtiko shortly, which is their Cuvée 15, I think it's called. And yeah, that's a little bit more affordable. So it's about £25 a bottle. So for a Santorini, that's actually not too bad. Obviously with the low yields, prices are skyrocketing. So yeah, that's the Scutali. And in terms of aging for that wine, so long, another 10 years, easy, in my opinion. It's easy peasy, and it will just get better and better and better. Right, let's move on to Mavro Tragano, because we're a little bit short on time. Sorry, my sound issues probably didn't help. So I wanted to show a red from Santorini as well, because red is made on Santorini. It's tiny percentages. I think Mavro Tragano makes up like 1 or 2% of entire plantings on Santorini. But it's another great variety that Hieronymus really wanted to think was one of the great wines of Santorini. And it's a pretty tricky grape. It's pretty tricky. It accumulates sugar really quick, which isn't ideal in a hot, arid climate like Santorini. And so loads of measures need to be undertaken to kind of rein it in, I suppose. And so it does give pretty powerful, full-bodied, alcoholic red wines, which is pretty classic of Santorini. But it's got a great affinity to oak, and so it does give a rich, spicy style. So this spends, I think, about 18 months in French oak barriques. Yeah, the name itself, Mavro Tragano, means kind of crunchy black, I believe. I think that's quite true. It's got nice bright acidity, and it's got nice crunchy red kind of bramble fruits, but this spicy, herbaceous. When I opened up my bottle, it had a kind of, sounds weird, but almost like a root vegetable-y note, and that is blowing off, thankfully, to give this wonderful cherry, dark cherry, plum flavor. So if anyone's got it in their glass as well, then shout. In terms of other grape varieties on Santorini, so Mandalari is is the most planted red grape, but it's still only about 10 or 15%. Obviously, Assyrtiko is the most planted at about 80% of vines on Santorini. And then you've got a grape variety called Etheri, which is predominantly used as a blending material. Again, it's relatively neutral. You don't see too many 100% Etheries. And then you've got Idani, which is the third most planted grape on Santorini, which Hatsudakis also do a 100% version of, which we had released just before Christmas. We've still got some, and we'll be releasing it in our Greek feature in May. But that gives a much more aromatic kind of jasmine and stone fruited, spicy style of white wine with really nice, bright, fresh acidity, and kind of shows Santorini's other string to their bow. The main other thing is Vinsanto, not to be confused with Vinsanto from Italy, which is different grapes and a slightly different winemaking process. We don't stock any Vinsanto from Santorini at the moment. We have done in the past. They're pretty amazing, but they are, in my opinion, quite hard work. We spoke about volatile acidity earlier. the Vinsantos from Santorini are seriously volatile. They're dried. The grapes are dried in the sun for days to really get intense concentration, to concentrate the sugars, the flavors, the acidity. Most importantly, when grapes are drying in the sun, you're losing a lot of the water. They're concentrating, and the acidity goes through the roof. And then fermented to around between 9 and 12 degrees, so not fortified, and then aged in oak for anywhere between 3 and 15 years. And so you end up with this really dark, almost treacle-like sweet wine, which are around 300 grams per litre of sugar, which is intensely sweet. But because of that super high acidity, the wines aren't cloying. But they're one to look out for, but there's not much of them in the UK market because they are quite challenging. Right, sorry. Any questions on Santorini? I'm aware that we're probably going to go over time, but
we've had a couple, but they are sort of working around the same sort of thing, really, and it's based on the yields that you touched upon, and the general sort of gist of the question. I think Samantha's got it really nicely. Is that whether you think Santorini is superior in quality, or is the cost driving more by the yields?
Santorini produces Greece's finest white wines, full stop. There is nowhere else in Greece that produces, there's nowhere else in the world really that produces wines like the wines on Santorini. They are completely, they're just, I can't think of the word, but they are completely singular. You can't repeat it anywhere else. And so that is definitely why prices are part of the reason why prices are up there, but certainly yields are a major thing. And you're now getting single vineyard bottlings, you're getting cuvées, which you're looking at sometimes up to 100 quid a bottle, and so the prices are skyrocketing for probably those two reasons, that it can't be copied and yields are incredibly low.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting though as well that with the price, in comparison to some other wine regions in the world, you do know that even though you are paying more, you are still getting a really high quality wine from Santorini. You're getting that, whereas in certain other regions you may not be getting, the bang for your buck, whereas in Santorini, you are.
Yeah, and that's not to say there aren't different styles. There are different styles of Assyrtiko. There's the Nicteri, which is the late harvested oak aged styles of Assyrtiko, and then there's the rich unoaked styles like this from Hatsudakis. So, but yeah, they are unlike any other.
Yeah, true to themselves. Perfect. Shall we go on to Naoussa?
Yeah. So hopefully, we'll be doing another one of these tastings later on in the year to coincide with our Greek offer in May, because I'm doing a 6-wine Naoussa mix case, 6 different producers, 6 different wines, nearly all from 6 different areas in Naoussa, which will be really exciting. And so the hope is to do a tasting where people can get a sample bottle of each of the 6 wines and taste along, and we can go even further into detail on Naoussa. So for those that haven't watched the previous video, Naoussa is up in the north of Greece. It's about 70 kilometers west of Thessaloniki, as you can see on your map there, and it's a PDO which is Sinomavro only, 100% Sinomavro, which means sour black in Greek, and that gives an idea as to what the wines taste like. They are super high in acidity. They are very, very tannic. They're relatively medium bodied, but there are quite distinct styles that are starting to appear. And so what I've tried to do is give 2 very differing styles for you to taste. Hopefully some of you have got both of them, but I'll do my best to describe them. So firstly, there is the Jeune Vin from Apostolos Themiopoulos, who hopefully you all know, and hopefully you've tried as Jeune Vin before. that is what I would class as quite a modern style of Cinemavro. It's picked relatively late. It spends a lot of time going through a cold soak, cold maceration to get deeper color extraction and to get lots of juicy fruit. Slightly warmer ferments, so you get slightly sweeter, slightly softer tannins. Also, young vines help with that as well. No oak whatsoever, so stainless steel, bottled young, and meant to drink within the first kind of few years. And this is just the ultimate introduction to Cinemavro. It is a lovely example of the grape, and it's just lovely. But to say a little bit more about Cinemavro, about Naoussa, so it's split pretty much into 13 crus. So think of it almost a bit like Beaujolais, or villages, I suppose. And Cinemavro should be treated almost a bit like a marathon runner. Like it's a super tricky grape to grow. It's super vigorous, so it really needs to be trained back pretty heavily. It's super, it's very like rot and powdery and downy mildews. It affects it very easily, and so it does need to be looked after. But when you get it right, it produces really lovely, aromatic, intense styles of red wine. In terms of the soils, so there's quite a lot of different terroirs in Naoussa, which is really exciting, which perhaps we'll go into more depth when we do our tasting later on in the year. But in general, the region is in the south a lot more lighter soils. So you've got your sandy clays, a little bit of granite, and a bit of schist, and that's where you typically get the more aromatic, fruity styles of Cinemavro. And then in the north, you tend to get more intensely coloured, deeper, richer styles of wine. And so from kind of south to north, so going from the lighter styles to the richer styles, you've got Trilofos, which is where the Thymiopoulos wine comes from. And so it sums up that area quite nicely. They're very aromatic. They're quite light-bodied, and they give this kind of, well, Cinemavro always, for me, gives this kind of tomato leaf, red currant, red cherry note. And this has lots of lovely herbs and spices on top of that. And the palate is relatively soft. 2019 is an incredible year for Greece all over, but especially in Naoussa. A lot of people I know were very keen on the 2017 of the Jeune Vin. The 2018 was lovely, but it was possibly in an earlier drinking style. This 2019 is definitely more towards the 2017. Although very approachable now, it does have still pretty grippy tannins and will age very nicely. But not as much as the Fundi, which we'll taste in just a second. So yeah, Trilofos and Phitia are where Thymiopoulos has his vines, which are down in the south. Trilofos is the second warmest area of Naoussa, so it does give quite seductive, plump styles, whereas Phitia is the complete opposite. Although it's right next door, it's much higher altitude, it's much cooler, it's a lot more tannic in style. And so those who remember the Bin series Cinemavro, I think it was Bin 4, I want to say, I can't remember. That was from Phitia, so that was from his higher altitude vines, a lot cooler, a lot more structured, a lot more intense, compared to this, which is a little bit softer. We are bringing out the next vintage of the Bin series wine. It will be in Apostolos' own label, so his Naoussa label. But yeah, we'll be bringing out the 2018 of that in our May offer. So keep an eye out for that, because it will probably go quite quickly, considering how quickly the Bin series wine went. But the hope really was to show the two wines side by side. So the Jeune Vin has been one of our most popular wines. It's in our top 100 selling wines, which for a Cinemavro from Greece is incredible. I think Sebastian Payne first bought the Jeune Vin 10 years ago, and he bought 13 cases. That was it. We now do about 100 cases a week, which is completely bananas. But I wanted to challenge members a bit and bring in something which is the complete opposite end of the spectrum, and bring in something from a more traditional winery, somewhere that harvests relatively early, that doesn't have quite as long maceration period, has much more rugged tannins, much higher acidity, longer oak aging. So this from Katima Fundi spends about 12 months in oak, and is, unfortunately, you can't see the color difference in here, but I mean, this is, the Fundi is like brick red and very, very pale. And so it's showing signs of age. It's from 2017, I believe, maybe 2016. But it's the complete opposite end of the spectrum. So I really wanted to challenge members to see, do they like the more modern style from Apostolos, or do they also like the really super traditional, hardcore tannic styles? So if you've got them side by side, then let me know what you think. The Fundi was Tim Atkins' wine of the week last week, and Victoria Moore chose it as her like Easter Sunday lamb wine in the Telegraph over the weekend, if you read that particular paper. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting style. It is one that will get better with age. A lot of people think that Fundi wines are at their peak after about 8-9 years, and so I would grab this and chuck 6 away for a couple of years if it's a bit too tannic for you now and a bit too acidic, but it will soften. The Fundi wine is from an area called Ramnista, which is probably most famous for a lot of area under vine by Kiryani, who we might be buying a bit from for this mixed case, but don't quite know yet. We'll see. And it's mostly clay and a bit of sand. So clay does tend to produce much denser, much more tannic styles of wine, because although still quite warm, Naoussa is a relatively cool growing area, and clay takes a long time to warm up. And so it does delay ripening quite a lot, and it does make very concentrated, very tannic styles of red wine. And so, yeah, hopefully we'll be able to explore the different areas a bit more with that mixed case. But yeah, certainly the Fundi will be part of it. We've got the new vintage of the Dalamara Naoussa, which, don't let Apostolos hear this, but for me, that Dalamara is the greatest wine in Greece. It is unbelievable. And so that'll be the 2018. And so, we've not done great for time on this, I'm sorry. But yeah, there are a few other kind of regions in Naoussa of note. There's Stransa, which is quite similar to Ramnista, and Gastra, which is actually the warmest area in Naoussa. And there's a winery called Carides, who have a Naoussa from Gastra, and that will be in the mixed case. And they say that Gastra is a lot like the Burgundy of Naoussa, and so slightly sweeter tannins, slightly softer. A lot of people talk about Zinamavro and Naoussa being like Pinot Noir and Nebbiolo. The Jeune Vin is definitely Pinot Noir. The Fundi is pretty serious Nebbiolo, like La Mora, kind of very aromatic, very firm, fine tannins. Yeah, sorry, any questions?
No, we do have some questions, but don't apologise at all. This has been excellent. I think what's really nice about this is that we're just going to get deeper and deeper into Greece with all the events that we've got going. And eventually we're all just going to feel like we are there. It's been great. I've really enjoyed actually being able to try the Ginamavro, the Naoussa Ginamavro. The Jeune Vin is a big favourite for the tastings team. It's a big favourite for me, and actually being able to try one that's that bit more serious, and like you said, it's that bit more rugged.
Yeah.
It's it's horses for courses, but I think I will love them both equally.
Mhm.
They'll serve different purposes, and it's just great that it's had this resurgence and been able to really become really popular. And that's thanks to you really for getting them.
I will say with the Fundi, the more serious one, that will get better for the next 4 days. When I first tried the sample a few months ago, I had it open for a week and it got better and better throughout the week. So don't feel like you need to
That's
drink it
an
all on
experiment for me then for the rest of the week to dip in each evening. So we do have some questions. We've got some lovely ones coming up. So
Good.
one of the first ones that might be nice to address is, how significant is vintage variation in Greece? And presumably that does vary by region.
Yeah. The good news is that vintage variation isn't massive in Greece. Don't ask me why. It's what the people who know far more than I do say. But also, I mentioned earlier that Greece should be considered a little bit like Italy. There are so many different regions, so many different grape varieties, so many different terroirs, yada, 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 that a great year in Naoussa might be a terrible year in Santorini, and a great year in Santorini might be a terrible year in Crete. What I can say is that certainly the last, we don't know too much about 2020 yet. I know that supposedly in the Nemea, ironically, the one we're not looking at today, it's supposed to be a wonderful vintage. I think that's characterized by our Society's Greek White 2020, which is sensational this year. But 2020 is looking like a good vintage. 2019 is an amazing vintage across the whole of Greece, from what I've heard, especially in Naoussa. 2018 was a slightly warmer vintage, so in general, wines are a little bit softer, a little bit sweeter, a little bit earlier drinking. And then 2017 again was a great vintage. So there's not a ginormous amount of vintage variation, but there are certainly the great vintages and the good vintages.
Perfect. And in terms of the vintages sort of having that slight variation but being relatively consistent, in terms of climate change, it's obviously that's something that always is coming up and a lot more frequently now. I mean, as we can tell from the warm weather some of us have seen today, is that something that's a cause for concern or actually going to be of benefit in Greece? Is it? Or is it a who knows? Is it a suck it and see, and we'll just
I mean, it's a cause for concern for everybody, no matter where you are. Even in England, it's a cause for concern because it's climate chaos in England, and so in Greece, it's hard to say. The good kind of safety blanket for Greece is that naturally vineyards have been kind of pushed up the mountains because it's such a mountainous country that they need the flatlands to grow crops, and so most of the good wine is up at altitude where it's relatively cool. And so I don't think climate change is affecting Greece at the moment too much, but also we're already used to alcohols of 14-15% in Greek wine, and so it's less of a shock, I suppose.
Yeah.
There's plenty that wineries and winemakers and viticulturists can do to ward it off. And in general, because it's indigenous grape varieties, it's a bit like Italy. These grapes are hardy and can resist super high temperatures, and so fingers crossed, we should be all right.
Yeah, and it's not like Greek winemaking is a new phenomenon. It's been around for years. So yeah. Absolutely. And we've had a lot of questions about a particular wine as well. So maybe Matthew, you'll be able to shed some light on this as to whether we'll be seeing a Retsina back on in our list anytime soon.
It's not, to be perfectly honest, it's not in my current plans. I know that a lot of members have enjoyed the Retsina from Tetramathos. I tried the most recent sample a couple of weeks ago, and it just was not good enough for me. And also, if I'm totally honest, it didn't have actually that much Retsina character, and so I do worry that some wineries are reining in the resin character for wanting to be a bit more commercial, and so to me, it didn't really sing Retsina. I'm sure soon enough I'll taste one and go, yes, that's the one I want to list. However, at the moment, like, Greek sales are incredible at the moment. It's absolutely unbelievable. We're 200% up on this time last year. It's insane. So thank you everybody who's buying Greek wine. But we were selling 2 cases a week of Retsina, and we're now selling 50 cases a week of a new wine. And so until we can really get Greece, Germany's in our sights in terms of total sales, which is great. Until we can get Greece kind of fully up there, and I can taste an example which I think really sings of Retsina, then yeah, absolutely. But I've not had one recently. Sorry. I know that there's a lot of members who are very keen to get one in.
But it's better to have one that's true to what it should be, or what we would like it to be, than to have one just to have one.
Yeah. I will mention, because I've been harking on about this offer in May. We're also doing a really exciting case, which I cannot wait to get out, which is going to be a mixed dozen of 12 different single indigenous grape varieties,
yes,
all under 15 quid. So it's going to be the absolute ultimate kind of introductory to Greece for everybody. 12 different wines, all individual grape varieties. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be the ultimate summer case. And so unfortunately there's not any Retsina in that, but we do have Tetramythos do an amazing orange wine, which I have bought, and that will be going in that offer as well. It's their Rhoditis, which is one of the grape varieties used to make Retsina. It's their orange wine, and it is unbelievable. So
I think that leads us quite nicely into perhaps our last question. In terms of exploration, this is from John Crawford. He said that Santorini, Crete, and Thessaloniki, are already recognised for quality. Which islands or regions are the ones to look out for next?
Nemea is great, like on the mainland. That does some wonderful wines. It's just at the moment we don't have any more premium examples. I wanted to show wines that are slightly more towards the premium end, just to really get an idea of the regions. But we've got a couple of amazing Ayurgiticos from Nemea who might have done very well in a recent blind tasting that we do every year. And so, yeah, Nemea is wonderful. Kefalonia is great, but it's quite expensive for the wines. We do have a Robola from Kefalonia coming out in the mixed dozen case, which is delicious. But to be honest, some of the other examples I've tasted from Kefalonia are just not worth the money, if I'm perfectly honest. But for me, those 4 with Kefalonia kind of as another aside that are the most exciting. But Crete's where it's at for me at the moment. I'm super excited about Crete, and so yeah, there's lots to come.
Yeah, I think I'm excited about Crete now too, and I think, judging by the chat, everyone else is, if they weren't already excited about Greek wines, they definitely are now. Got a lot to be looking forward to.
Just seems to comment about Samos. Yeah, definitely Samos for their sweet wines. We do the Samos Anthemis, which is in bang for buck sweet wines at the Wine Society. That Samos is one of the best you've got, and it might have also done very well in a recent blind tasting that we do every year.
You did hear that here. Wow. So, yeah. Thank you very much, Matthew. That's been an excellent hour.
Whirlwind, sorry.
No, it's a whirlwind that makes us want more, which is good, because we're going to get more. We're going to get those wines from the offer. We're going to get those other events. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. It was lovely to have you all here, to have so many Greek fans. And thank you, Matthew.
No problem. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the sun, and have a drink. Cheers. Bye.